Hello, Jack, mate. You well?
I'm very good, thank you, Cal. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. I'm really excited by the guest we got on this week. It's Mental Health Awareness Week, and I think we have the perfect guest.
I completely agree. We have David Smith MBE joining us. David's probably got one of the most inspiring stories I've ever heard, and I'm really looking forward to sort of going into it in a bit more detail with him. David's represented Great Britain at 5 different sports, so clearly has an exceptional amount of sort of talent and ability when it comes to sport, but he also probably has one of the best mindsets of anyone I've ever heard from. And I'm really looking forward to kind of delving into that story. David's had multiple health issues throughout his career, and I'm really looking forward to just hearing how he's coped with that and how his mental health has really kind of essentially got him through his life.
Yeah, it's crazy to think when he's gold medalist at London 2012 and an MBE, and that doesn't even scratch the surface of what he's achieved and what he's been through in his life. Let's get him on.
Let's do it.
I just want to kick off by thanking you for joining us. And it was hard to know where to start on your story because obviously it's such an inspirational story and very varied, multiple sports, multiple health issues. But Jack and I were looking you up on the internet earlier, and there was an article which stood out for us from the Scottish Herald, which you wrote the column and said your New Year's resolution for 2019 was just to live. That for us was such a powerful message. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, so I guess that's a point you don't just arrive at that point in your life. You know, that takes you've got to go on almost a journey to get to that sort of destination, and it basically accumulated through 10 years of diagnosis with a rare sort of tumor. You could call it terminal. It's a genetic tumor that's been there from birth. It's caused problems my whole life. And I was first diagnosed in 2010, and I've gone through 6 surgeries. I've been paralyzed. I've had to learn to walk several times. I've spent a tremendous amount of time, pretty much actually all of my 30s was in and out of hospital, huge chunks of time in ICU. And in a lot of ways, you could see it as a gift that I've actually seen the end of life. I've seen, because I've been in ICU for so long, I've seen people die. I've been fighting for my breaths over this journey, and to arrive at that point where your New Year's resolution is that you actually just genuinely want to live is you've got to go through a lot of trauma. I think for me personally, it was a lot of trauma to get to that point, because I think in life we're so focused with goals, we're so focused with trying to achieve things externally that sometimes we forget about the internal journey, and that's really where you find true happiness is internal. So when I was paralyzed in 2016, I started doing a lot of study. I took a lot of courses at Yale, Harvard, and one of the most popular courses there was positive psychology. And one of the biggest questions is how do we flourish? You know, what is happiness? And so many of people think that happiness comes from an external thing. If I buy this car or I achieve an Olympic gold medal, I'm going to be happy. If only when I lose 5 kilos, then I'm going to be happy. You know, once I make this breakthrough, I'm going to be happy. And then people get there and they get this acute sort of release of dopamine and they feel great about themselves, but then it's not, you just return back to base levels. So a lot of the stuff I was reading in the research was actually that happiness has to come from within. So for me to get to that sort of New Year's resolution, I started to find my values, my philosophy, who was I as a person. That actually took me away from high performance sport, because I didn't want to win medals. I was happy just to make the start line. So to me, it was all about living in the moment, savoring moments. And this came about when I was lying in ICU, and I remember speaking to a gentleman in the bed next to me, and he said, you know, I've always been focusing on the next thing. I've always been living in the present and actually really forgot to live in the now. I've always been, you know, like setting goals, chase the goal, get there, feel quite empty after I achieve it, then have to set another goal. And he said, I never really had clarity about what I was trying to do. And I said, yeah, that kind of sounds like me with sport. I'm always trying to chase this elusive medal or this title. And actually I always felt really empty. So I realized then when you're in hospital and you're fighting for that last breath, all you really have is memories. You don't have your medals, you don't have your card, whatever it is that you've got, wherever you found that external happiness, you don't have with you at the end. You only have memories, and memories are created from experiences. So I realized in 2019, I started writing the column, going into that year, into New Year's resolution, that it was generally, I just want to live. And that was it. And by that was my philosophy. I discovered that actually my philosophy is to live where your feet are, live in the moment, be fully engaged in what you're doing at that time, which is a gateway to getting into flow, which is the zone that athletes speak about. And for me, that was actually just being alive and no more. I don't want anything else from life. If I can breathe, then I'm happy.
And is that something you've continued forward now, day-to-day basis of just being alive?
Yeah, absolutely. I try to do that every day. I have a morning routine. If every morning I wake up, the very first thing I do is I breathe for 60 seconds. Now that might sound crazy because we're always breathing. Yeah. But if I ask people how many breaths you take in a minute, most people will never be able to tell you how many breaths they take in a minute. Average maybe 16 to 18 breaths a minute for an adult. But we're never grateful for our breathing. We never stop and say gratitude for having lungs and having this ability to breathe. Not until you lose something, then you realize how important it was to you. And again, we so focus massively on that external thing that we forget the internal, and the internal is having lungs. So the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is I tune into my breathing, and I breathe for 60 seconds, where I inhale for 4 seconds through my nose and I exhale for 6 seconds out my mouth. That stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, so it sets you up. I then set one intention for the day, and that can be anything. It can be to get on my bike and exercise. It can be to call a friend, make some food, whatever that one intention is. Then I say one thing I'm grateful for, and then I put my feet on the floor and I smile, and I say to myself, be in the now. And wow. And I set that, I live religiously by that every single day, and it works. It changes. It's changed my neurochemistry, my neuroanatomy, and basically it encouraged me to basically always live in the now, always live in the moment. We don't have tomorrow. We don't own tomorrow, and I think that too many of us spend so much time in our heads. We're actually living in the future, and a future that we don't really have.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, you've had so many chapters of your life that we've seen and we've heard a little bit about already. But if to do it justice, I think we need to go right back to the beginning and just tell us a little bit about kind of growing up, because I think you had a few sort of medical struggles even growing up.
Yeah, I was born originally with talapaces, which is known as clubfoot. So I think 1 in 1,000 babies are born with that, and I didn't have surgery. I was lucky that at that point they had sort of a corrective procedure where they sort of repeatedly it was like almost breaking the bones in the foot, but they reset my feet in special plaster casts and boots. So I learned to walk in these special boots. So I guess ultimately that a career in sport is not always the direction you would take when you're born with this disability, and especially I was born in 1978, so the medical advancements are not there as they are now. And at the same time, I was also born with a faulty gene almost in my spinal cord in my neck, which produced a tumor. So these two things is kind of what the cards I was dealt with. And I've always played life like a game of poker. You can have good cards and play a rubbish hand, or you can have really bad cards and play well, you know. And I kind of, that's how I've seen my life. So I grew up I had these disabilities. I didn't find out about the tumor until I was 32. But the foot issue was evident obviously from birth right away, and that causes a lot of stress. And what we need to be aware of is that we're actually our brains are forming right up until the age of 30. Our prefrontal cortex doesn't mature until the age of 30, but from the age of 0 to 8 is when we receive our programming. So this stuff's all getting programmed into your beliefs, your values, and then you take that through your teenage years into your 20s, and then ultimately the rest of your life we run on a subconscious level. So during those early years I was exposed to high amounts of stress, and from the feet, I had 4 or 5 convulsions from the tumor where I almost died, and I was rushed into the hospital with a blue light with an ambulance, and had crazy amounts of tests done, and they could never find out what was wrong with me. They misdiagnosed me with epilepsy, and I was put on Tegretol for almost over 10 years. And Tegretol, these medications have their own price to pay. So this initial programming area for me was a very highly stressed environment, which obviously then caused a lot of mental scarring later on in life. But I was just very thankful that I had the one solid I had and the one consistent I had was sport. Even though the environment was constantly changing around me with my condition and the stress, I always had my sport to go to, and that's where I found that I could it was like my escape, basically. So it wasn't something that I enjoyed it, but it was actually I needed it. I needed to have that escape.
And that's really interesting, because you saw the sport as an escape, where a lot of people talk about sports at the highest level, which is exactly where you got to in multiple sports, as a stressful thing, but you saw that as a total release.
Yeah, it was a complete release. And I think at that age, sport causes a lot of neurochemistry in the brain. So you get a lot of dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, all these releases of these neurochemicals in the body. And there'll be a lot of people who get them from recreational substances. They'll go down the other route. And actually you can get all the same releases from sport. So I discovered that very early on. A lot of people I was hanging out with started to experiment and not exposing their body to sport, but maybe taking party drugs or whatever it was. And I actually found that I was getting this same high, but it was from sport. It was from running. It was from skiing. It was from, I never took up sport to go to be on a national team. I wanted to go to the Air Force and be a physical training instructor. So for sport, for me, it was just a catalyst to escape all the stress that was going on. But it was also something where I could just focus fully in. And I didn't even know about flow. I had no idea about flow at that point in my life, but I was getting into it every single day, whether it was skiing, water skiing, karate, anything that was taking my focus and my concentration and zoning it in. And I was getting all these releases of dopamine and all these new chemicals. So I was feeling great and I loved it. And then it became addictive. And then I couldn't get enough of it. And I just wanted more and more and more and more. And what was really interesting is that can be quite dangerous as well, because it becomes an obsession. But ultimately, the one thing that's kept me alive through all of the tumor surgeries is the fact that I've been fit and healthy, both mentally, spiritually, and physically. And that's a byproduct of having a lifetime in sport. And ultimately, and I've made some pretty great friends through the whole journey. That's the one thing for me. It's never been about medals. I don't even know, my medals are at home in a box, but my friends are people I speak to every day that I've met through sport. So sport's been as Nelson Mandela said, it has the power to bring people from all over the world together. And for me, that is definitely something that's held true.
Yeah, it's incredibly inspiring. I mean, I think some of our listeners will know your journey, but some maybe don't. So can you just give us a bit of colour as to those sports you mentioned? Which ones were the main focus? Certainly at the start of your kind of sporting career.
Yeah, so I started off in a sport called shinty, which actually golf found its roots from. It's a Gaelic sport in Scotland where you have 12 aside, and you have like a defence, a centre, and a forward, and the goal. The objective is to put a small level ball in the net. But it's a pretty rough sport. So for anyone who's familiar with hurling in Ireland, it's very, very similar to hurling. So that was my original sport, and I won a few junior Scottish titles in there. At the same time, I took up karate. I went on to get a black belt in karate and fight for my association for Great Britain for 5-6 years. I did Shotokan karate, so it wasn't sport karate, it was the traditional form. I also skied, water skied. I ended up working on the British ski team for a small time as an assistant coach. I ran track and field, so I ran 200 and 400, the East of Scotland 400 metre title. But I had all the problems and issues with my feet and the tumour, so I had constant health issues there, so I could never really fulfil my potential in athletics. But I absolutely loved my track and field days, albeit they were very short. I spent a few winters pushing as a side pusher and a brakeman on the British bobsleigh team, and then after that I ended up rowing for Great Britain for 5 years, and then I spent 6 years in the British cycling team. So basically a whole lifetime of sport.
And I want to roll back slightly and touch on a few of those sports, because the karate was was, from what I've read, one that really got you into that competitive nature. Is that fair? And I know you said you weren't worried about winning, you weren't worried about medals, but you have to have that competitive edge to do what you've done throughout your career. So is it fair to say that karate was the one that kicked that off? Excuse the pun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say when I ran my gold medal in London, I actually sent an email to my first karate instructor to say thank you. I would never have won this gold medal without your input.
Wow.
And he kind of was like, huh? He didn't really know. And what I realized now from studying more about psychology and neuroscience is that I was working on this stuff when I was 8-year-old. I had no idea, because karate was all about breathing. It was all about control, trying to control the autonomic nervous system. So what karate did for me is that it did several things. It taught me respect. In karate, you always have a sensei and a senpai. So anyone who's older than you or above you, they're always going to be there. So you always have that mentor. So you always learn to look up to people, respect people. So it teaches you great life values, and it teaches you discipline. But also what it teaches you resilience. It teaches you courage. It teaches you persistence. It gives you all these character strengths that actually have a massive crossover in life. And I used to go and train in an Aberdeen dojo with an Aberdeen Shokan Karate Club, and they were tough guys. It was in Torry, which is a rough council estate in Aberdeen. And I used to go over there, and the very first time I went there, I remember fighting this guy from Glasgow, and within 30 seconds, he knocked me unconscious. And when I came round, my nose was bust, I was bleeding, and they basically stuck 2 tissues up my nose, and they lifted me up, and they were like, right, you're up in the next fight again. And I was only 15, and this guy was a grown adult, and and at the time, you could have been forgiven to be thinking, well, that's pretty brutal. But actually, what that taught me was that anytime I get knocked down in life, I just get back up, and that's played a huge part in the diagnosis, because every time I've been diagnosed, it's like being punched in the face. Yep. And all I know from my early programming was just to get back up, go again, get back up, go again. And I remember on a Wednesday, I used to start to fear the karate club on a Wednesday. And then my parents would drive me over there on the Saturday morning. I'd spend 2 or 3 hours getting basically bounced off the walls of this dojo, because all we did was fight there. There was no kata in it. It was just kumite. And then drive home, and it would take me 2 or 3 days to recover. And then by the Wednesday, I was starting to get scared again for the Saturday. And that went on for a few years. But what it gave me is I don't know if it necessarily built that competitiveness, that will to win, but what it did give me is it gave me a lot of understanding of resilience and persistence, and be able to face your fears. I think I think we can all hold our hand up and say that there's stuff we're scared of in life. Uncertainty causes anxiety, so we definitely have these fears in life. And what karate gave me, along with the discipline and the respect, it gave me a way to manage internally to deal with fear. Yeah. And that's something that, there's no bigger opponent than going up against cancer, tumors, or going into a surgery you have no control over. And at that point, you could just lose it completely, or you can really go internal and start to control your body. And I think karate probably taught me that. Out of all the sports, it taught me that. And that's then drifted over to all the other competition sports, because sports all about getting the right amount of arousal and anxiety. So you hit the arousal curve at the right amount of time, at the right sort of stimulus. So you're not over anxious, but you're not half asleep. And I guess karate's taught me how to control that, which has helped me in all of my sports.
I've talked to people. I'm 37 years old, and I've been talking to people about sport my whole life. Just talking to you about sport is a totally different perspective than anyone I've ever spoken to. You seem to draw so much out of each sport you took part in. It's unreal. And I think we'll use the word probably multiple times. It's just inspirational. I'm going to skate over your running career, and that's no disrespect to that at all, but I really want to touch on the bobsleigh side, because I think that's a sort of left field sport that most people don't jump into, especially British Isles. How did that come about?
So again, it came from the athletics career. There was a lot of ex-sprinters go to bobsleigh. At that point, I had formed the obsession of Olympics. That was kind of well into my programming then, and I wanted to go to the games. I trained with a guy, Ian Mackey, who at that point was one of the fastest white dudes in the world. and I was never going to run those times. And I was watching Eurosport one weekend, and bobsleigh came on, and I was like, wow, that looks awesome. And I basically went down to Bath University, did some tests, and then ended up out in Lillehammer with a sort of an army team at the time, pushing those guys. And it was just, I wouldn't say I was ever any good at it. Obviously, the health issues I had held me back. I think I'm probably more naturally predisposed to being an endurance athlete. And that's obviously a real high power sport that requires a lot of power. So I was mediocre. I was never going to be a world breaker at it. But I had a great time. I pushed in a couple of World Cups, a couple of Europa Cups, spent most of the time injured. But I had some fun times. It was a little bit of a blur amongst all the sports I've done. To be honest with you, if I could rewind the clock fully, I would have probably gone into para sport at a younger age, because I could have been to 5-6 games by now and won a whole host of medals. But it is what it is. Nowadays the talent ID for para sport is picked up a lot easier. In those days, my perception of Paralympic sport was if you're in a wheelchair, you do Paralympic sport. If you're not, you don't. But that's all changed now. And London had a big, I think Beijing, Sydney as well was a huge part, but certainly Beijing and London really changed people's perception of what para sport was. And certainly now, even just to make a para team, I'm going to go out in one here and say pretty much most able-bodied people I know wouldn't make onto a para team. Like, the guys who cycle, if you had to go and match someone similar to you, these guys are putting out huge amounts of power, and most of the able-bodied guys I ride with can't match my Paralympic cycling friends.
Yes.
So it's really moved on, and I think it's a real aim, and it really is a parallel with the Olympics now.
And that's great, isn't it? And that moves us nicely into your rowing, where you, as you mentioned, you won the gold medal at London Olympics. Before we get onto that feeling of winning gold, how did you get into rowing, and what was that like?
So at that time, I was working as a coach on the Olympic ski team, and I was working with a physio. And I was having all sorts of neck problems, back problems, always in pain. And she actually said to me, I work in Paralympic sport, and you classify clearly for Paralympic sport. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah, London actually has the games. There's a home games. And at that point, I wasn't, I was probably at that point very guilty I was going through life unaware. I wasn't very awoke. I wasn't aware of what was going on around me. I was just trucking through life. Next thing, okay, I'll deal with that. And I certainly wasn't living the way I live sort of mentally and spiritually now. And this talent ID day came up. I thought, I'll go along. I'll see what it's about. Go with an open mind. I'm always a great believer. I try to live with a philosophy, and I always tell people, if you're about to jump out an airplane, you want your parachute to open. If not, you're going to hit the deck hard. And I always say to people, if your mind is closed, then it's not going to work. So if you think of your mind like a parachute and your mind is open, then it'll work, and it'll save you from death. So if we approach life in a similar way, with that open mind, then it's amazing where we can find ourselves and the opportunities that arise. And I just went along that day with an open mind. Jumped on a rowing machine. I pulled at a time that was relatively respectable. I absolutely loved the feeling of the endurance. And 2 weeks later, I think I was in Caversham doing tests with the British team. I seen the setup, the support, everything that was to do with being in one of Britain's most successful sports, and I just fell in love instantly. And then within a few months, I was living there, doing sort of 20 sessions a week on the water, erging, and just basically fell in love with it. And I thought, this is fantastic. Life is great.
Brilliant. Jack, I get the feeling when David says he jumps on the rower and pulled out a relatively respectable time, he absolutely smashed it, didn't he?
I think so. And I thought that earlier when he said he was only mediocre at bobsleigh and then went to World Cups and European Championships. I mean, Cal and I are mediocre sports people. That's not mediocre. What was that feeling like, David? You mentioned about how it almost became a bit of an obsession, perhaps, that you wanted to get to an Olympic Games or Paralympic Games. What was that feeling like when London was coming around? What was that excitement? How did that feel?
Yeah, it was amazing to be, certainly an environment, such a great thing for when you're in an environment that just breeds success and breeds medals. You just want to be part of that, and you want to win a medal, and you're just there surrounded by it. Every day you turned up to Caversham, there's photos on the wall of all the past Olympic medalists, Paralympic medalists, world champions. It's everywhere. So you're surrounded by this environment that just produces the world's best. And you're sitting I used to sit on there, next to Andy Hodge and people like that, and you think, well, this guy's got, already, Olympic medal, gold medalist, and we end up a triple Olympic gold medalist, multiple world champions. So you develop a mindset that's all about winning. Now, that's great, but it also has a price to pay, because also that can go against some people's natural values. Where my natural value, I just love sport. I just want to move my body, and all of a sudden now I'm in an environment that if you don't win, you're not a success. Silver medal is almost seen as a failure. So for the mental health and the pressure, it was horrendous. And we went into London basically with this objective that we were only there to win a gold medal. And that brings with it an extreme amount of high pressure. And 2 years before London, I had my first diagnosis. So I was actually lying paralyzed temporarily in a hospital bed with tubes coming out my neck, 2 years out from the biggest race of my life. And all I could think about was I want to be on the start line, and I want to cross the finish line in first place. And anything else is a complete failure. And that environment bred that mindset, which you could say on one flip of the coin, that's really great. Britain's very successful, but at what cost? And, what is success? It's different to everyone. But in this instance, success was only measured by gold medals. So it's, as a gold medalist, it's easy to walk away from that and say, well, that was great. But actually, the more I delved into it, that psychologically it was a pretty horrendous environment to be in, because if you weren't performing, then there was a ton of pressure coming down on you. So it was a tough environment. And that day in London, our main boat, Tom Ager in the single, who'd been undefeated since Beijing, he lost. He didn't get a medal. He came 5th or 4th. And I remember just as we were pushing off, I heard Tom Ager 4th or 5th place, and I was like, wow, that's the first time Tom's ever been beaten in his whole rowing career, and it was at his home games. And like, right, I can't even think about that. I've got to bring my focus back into our boat and into our performance. So it was, in some instances you'd say it's the greatest moment in my life in sport. It really wasn't. It was a moment that I think I'm honoured to have experienced and to come away with a gold medal, but it certainly wasn't. It wasn't my most favourable moment in sport. It was a really high, stressful, nerve-wracking experience that it is kind of nice, but it doesn't replace riding my bike through the Alps or skiing off backcountry cliffs. It's nowhere near it.
So it sounds like that pressurized environment took away from the sense of achievement that you got from winning gold medal. And that was something that you'd focused on for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think, Kathy Freeman probably says it beautifully. Actually, she doesn't even have to say it. When she won her 400 meter in Sydney, she sat down and cried on the track. It was a relief. And I think you find that there's different levels of the Olympics. There's obviously the dream of getting picked for an Olympic team. And then when you're picked, then there's it'd be great to win an Olympic medal. I've got friends who have won Olympic medals, and it's been like, wow, they've got a bronze medal. It's the best thing that's ever happened to them. And then you hear other athletes, they'll maybe have a silver medal, and it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and they're sitting depressed and having suicidal thoughts and all these things. And you kind of think, wow, this is an insane thing, because we all take up sport because we actually love it and enjoy it, and then it becomes this almost this toxicity to us. So I think for me, it certainly, after I won the medal, it was a relief, to be honest. It was like, thank God that's over. Like I retired that day from rowing. I told my coach in the village, I was like, I ain't coming back. I don't enjoy this.
I'm
enough
done.
to do it for another 4 years.
Brilliant. And then obviously that wasn't enough for you. You decided there was another sport that you were going to go and conquer. So cycling took over, and it seems like from what we've said that that's your real passion. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. After the London Games, I was a little bit lost because, all of a sudden you have this medal and everyone wants a little piece of you. You're going to all these events and talks and parties and stuff, and people just want to see the medal, get a photograph, and then they just leave, and you're kind of like, oh, what's going on? And this is a bit of a whirlwind for a little bit of time, and so I actually, after all that stuff was going on, I sort of thought, this is not really me. I want to go home. So I went home to Aviemore, dug out my skis. I spent the whole winter skiing with a few of my friends. We're skinning, going backcountry, doing all that stuff I loved. As the summer months started to come in, Noel Baxter, who's a good friend of mine who was an Olympic skier, said, oh, let's get the bikes out. And I had an old bike from when I worked with the ski team in the garage. I thought, let's go cycling. That sounds like a great fun. So the first thing we ever did was we cycled this 130-mile loop round the Highlands. And
that's your first ride, 130 miles.
130 miles was like one of my first rides with Noel, and it was brutal. It was insane. It was a really stupid thing to do, but I loved it. And then one of the second rides we ever did was 160 miles around the whole of the national park. So around all the ski resorts in Aviemore, around by the Lecht and Glen Shee and these places. And it was amazing. We were like 10 hours on the bike. And I just fell in love with it. I thought it was amazing. It took me back to my childhood where it was all about just pushing your mind and your body and seeing how far you could take it. Yeah. So I got into time trialing, which a lot of ex-showers do. It's the race of truth, as it's called. It's basically you against the clock in your mind. And I loved it. I literally fell in love with it from the very first one I did. And then I got into the whole mechanics behind it. I got the right bike. I got into the aero stuff, the wheels, the suits, everything. And I was just driving around the north of Scotland every Wednesday night, parked up in a lay-by with a bunch of other nutcases, seeing how fast we could go over 10 miles or 25 miles. And Great Britain has a huge tradition in time trialing. So it's massive, and in England it used to be illegal. So the races all have like codes. So it's like the V710 or the V3, and it was all secrets because they weren't allowed to do it. So there's like this mythical thing about it, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was an amazing sport, and unfortunately, my time with British cycling was hampered with basically multiple surgeries, paralysis, and a fight for my life. So the thing is with time trialing is that you in any sport you're suffering, but you make the choice to suffer, and at any time you can stop, anytime you can say, you know what, I've had enough. But when you're living with a tumor or with cancer, you can't stop the suffering. You can't say, you know what, this is my time, I'm out of here now. So it was basically like this race for life. There was one race where I was trying to go faster, and in the other race I was actually trying to slow things down, which was the tumor. And these both played out intertwined basically through my whole cycling career up until the point where I basically chose to leave the program. But I absolutely love my cycling. I'm still competing now. I still ride every day. I still train. I'm not the athlete I was because I only ride now with one leg and one arm. And but I still love it. I can't walk very far, but I can jump on my bike and ride across the Alps. So for my psychology, that is huge.
Brilliant. It's so difficult to put into words. I know we keep saying the word inspirational, but I think it is the best word to sum up your story, and just how you've overcome your hurdles, but also competed at the highest level in so many different sports. It's just an amazing story. And I'm really petrified about that ride around Richmond Park now, because I know that I'm going to be chasing your tail, to say the least.
I don't, this is the thing. It's so interesting because we all know when you jump on the bike, it's very hard to control the ego. It's very hard to control the chimp. So the little limbic system that drives us. So I'm very, very lucky and very fortunate. I've done a lot of work with Steve Peters over the last few years, and one of the things I really had to let go was that, because a lot of people pass me now. So I remember going out when in 2014 I was pretty strong. I used to ride around at like 34 35 kilometers an hour everywhere I went for 2-3 hours, and I could smash out 100-mile rides back to back every day. Where now I don't, and now I ride around at 23-24 kilometers an hour, and there's sometimes I get passed by, like I've been passed by people on the Santander bikes. I've got it's such an interesting psychology, because you have to really let go of a lot of things. And one of the great philosophers speaks a lot about Michelangelo, and they asked Michelangelo, what did you see when you see David? And he said, well, I just seen a marble, and what I had to do is I had to chip away and get rid of all the marble to have this perfection. And actually, as a human being, we have to let go of a lot of things, and letting go of things like the ego and letting go of these things is a real prominent thing in our development as human beings, to try and live a good life and be happy. So to actually be able to let that Santander bike overtake me now is actually quite a hard thing to do. But I always try to say to myself, you know what, okay, these people, there's no one out riding today that's been through what I've been through. And when I'm on the bike, people don't even know I'm paralyzed. And sometimes I'll stop at a traffic light and sort of lift my arm like this, and they'll look down at my orthotic prosthetic leg thing, and they're like, oh, and they're blown away if they ask, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm paralyzed. I only cycle with one arm and one leg. And actually, they don't really, because my spinal injury is so high, and what people don't sometimes realize is if you have a spinal cord injury, whatever height you have it at, everything underneath is affected. So even though it looks like I've got a right arm and right leg, I can't put enough power through my right leg because everything here down is affected. So 2 nights ago, I couldn't even stand 2 nights ago. Like I just went to stand up off the sofa and just fell and hit the ground because my nerves stopped working. So visually, if someone would see me, they're like, oh, doesn't look there's anything wrong with that guy. But actually, everything from here on both sides is affected. So it's very hard for me to go out and race these guys I used to be able to race. So I had to let go of that.
David, I mean, Cal touched on what an inspiration it is for him and I just to listen to your story, and it must be the same for anyone else that listens to your story. Who, apart from maybe yourself, inspires you, and who's been there throughout this and has been there to kind of support you through this incredible journey you've been on?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. You always know your true friends because they're the ones that come and see you in hospital.
Yeah.
And the people, you know, the people who were there post London with the medal are no longer there. No. So that gives you an idea of that. And I always try to say to the younger athletes, you know, make sure people are friendly with you because of who you are, not what you are. And one of the psychologists I worked with had me do a really great exercise once. They got me just to draw a circle, write me in the middle of it, write my tribe, all the people in there, and then in the outer circle was loose contacts, and then the outer circle was people you know. And it was really interesting when you get into the heart of the circle. And there, you know, if I go back, I grew up in a very small village in Aviemore, so there's people there I went to primary school with. If I phoned them up tonight and said, look, I've got an issue, they would drive to London for me. But I've not spoke to them for 20 years. It's just, it's a Highland way. It's a Scottish little village way. But you know, I grew up with Noel Baxter, Alan Baxter. Those guys were a big inspiration and big influence on my life. The thing is with inspiration is, you know, you bring light into somebody's body, you bring light and breath into their body, and it's what you actually do. Inspiration can be very short-lived. You know, I can inspire someone right now, but then tomorrow they go back to base level again. It's what you do with that inspiration. So I sometimes like if you can have a real influence on someone's life as well, so you actually influence it, so you start to shape what they do. And for sure, I think, you know, people like Alan Baxter had that on me. There's Craig McLean, who's a great friend of mine, who rode with Chris Hoy. All these guys in the sporting world have certainly influenced my sporting world. There's a new psychologist who's written a book about mirror thinking, and it's about our role models in our life and how we actually mirror people that we find as an influence or an inspiration. And certainly I look at, you know, the obvious sporting heroes that have come out of the UK have all influenced me in a certain way. But some of the biggest inspiration I've got has been on the cancer wards. seeing young kids fighting for their life. I remember going to a children's hospital after London, and there was a young kid who'd lost his leg from cancer. And I was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, I want to be a Blade Runner. And that really moved me. And then when I went through radiation in 2019 at UCLH, I was seeing young kids in there, and it's like, man, it just, I don't even know if inspiration is the right word. It just moves you to go and live your life. And I always say, when I went to radiation, when I went down into the UCL, into the Macmillan, into the cancer wards, everyone, 99% of people were happy. People were smiling. They were engaging in conversation. Then I would come back up onto the street, and everyone was unhappy. And I was like, what is wrong with this picture? And I almost felt like the people who are healthy almost owe it to the people who are dying to try and live a purposeful life. So I grew a lot of I grew a lot of sort of inspiration from people just who I met in hospital, and I'll never know their names, just the way they chose to live life. So I'm always inspired by people who follow their values, who know their philosophies. It's not about the external thing, it's more about the internal thing. I get a great amount of inspiration from education, from thinking. I'm more inspired recently by reading classics, Socrates, Plato, all the great philosophers, to trying to get a meaning of life. I'm not really hooked up into the whole celebrity world. That doesn't nourish me. I love searching out some of the great professors and trying to understand their thinking. That's what was great about Roger Bannister. The guy breaks the 4-minute mile. If you asked him what he was most proud of, it was his work in neuroscience, stuff that really changed and really did impact. And sport is an amazing thing, and I think it's a beautiful thing. But there's so many people that do amazing things in the world that sometimes go unnoticed because there's not an Olympic gold medal at the end of or an FA Premiership or whatever. And like I think if we can, it's very important to balance both education and sport. I didn't stick in my education when I was a youngster. I kind of messed it all up, and I took to it later on in life. But yeah, I think for inspiration, the people I've met in hospital over the years, who a lot of them are not with us anymore, like just to see that human spirit in somebody fight is a remarkable inspiration. And I often, when I've done talks in the past, I've always said to people, if you're struggling for inspiration and you're struggling to motivate people, go along to the Marsden Hospital, go to a children's hospital, take some pens and papers in and sit with the kids for a day. And if you can't come out of there grateful and inspired and to go and live a purposeful life, then you're very unconnected. And to see, and it's not, so for me, like, obviously the obvious sports people have influenced me, absolutely, but I've pulled a lot of inspiration from the people I've met in hospital.
I think that's such a good message for people, and you've educated us so much on this podcast. I'm blown away by how much I'm going to take away from this. It's been a great fun chatting to you, David. Really appreciate that. What we do at FCE is we always ask our guests the one FCE question, that if we could take you to any event in the world and have the full FCE experience where we take care of everything for you, you don't have to think of anything, what would your event be?
Oh, wow.
It could be sport, it could be music, you decide.
Wow. Oh, man. It's hard to say. Probably sport. Obviously something in sport. But I love everything. I've done lots of different events, stuff, and enjoy them. But yeah, probably something in sport. Maybe a rugby, a Scotland-England rugby match would be.
Murrayfield, we can.
Yeah, that's always that's pretty cool. One of my earliest sporting memories was watching David Soul march in the 1990 Calcutta Cup, he marched Scotland onto the pitch, making England wait. And I know that there's probably more. You guys are probably having more English listeners, but that was like one of my earliest Scottish memories. And I actually had the privilege of meeting David a few years ago and do some work with him now. And I was so shocked. The only thing when I met him, I was like, "Oh my God, you're David Soul." I was like, I remember watching you in my living room, and and sometimes you say you never want to meet your hero, and actually in this instance, meeting David was a pretty special moment. So yeah, I think if I could go to any event, it would probably be a Scotland-England rugby match when Scotland are on fire and we beat you guys. if you could give that as part of the full experience, I'd be grateful.
We can have a word.
Have a word and sort the result for it. Listen, David, I cannot thank you enough. What an absolutely amazing story, and it was great to listen to you chat about it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was an honour. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, guys. Cheers. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on. Thanks.